Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And today, as we start our look at the top free agents around baseball, we're going to break down Roki Sasaki, the biggest name coming out of Japan this offseason.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the radio over at 97.5 The Fanatic for 5 years now, just doing Philadelphia sports talk about the big four teams. I've also been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're consuming this in podcast form. If you're watching on YouTube or you want to check us out on YouTube, see the video component of the show, hit that subscribe button. It'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. It's also, it's free, it's easy. It's a great way to help us out here on Locked On Phillies. Hitting that subscribe button if you like the content really helps us out. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. If you need tickets to anything, Game Time is the way to go. Now, we're going to start doing some free agent evaluations. We ran through, if you want to see like the list of the top 25 free agents that we went through. Yesterday's episode has that, and I was just breaking down who the Phillies should be interested in on that list. And as we go down that list, we're going to go top to bottom for highest name to like lowest profile name. As far as the guys that I said the Philadelphia Phillies could be interested in. We're going to start with Roki Sasaki today, the new big thing coming out of Japan. We're also going to talk about the confirmation of a Juan Soto story that we discussed a week ago, maybe more, on Locked On Phillies. And then we're going to wrap up with the two teams who keep popping into conversations about, all right, let's call it three teams that keep popping into conversation about Alec Bohm if he is indeed traded. So busy episode today. Where we start is with Roki Sasaki. Now, this dude is just absolutely a monster in Japan right now. And he is coming over this offseason, and he's going to be a great steal for whoever ends up getting him. Now, remember, right, we're going to compare him real quick to Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who came over last offseason. The Phillies offered a major deal to, which was kind of groundbreaking because they don't normally go after these Japanese player postings. And they made that offer to Yamamoto. Now, Yamamoto was never coming here. He ends up with the Dodgers. And something to look at with that career path for Yamamoto is that he was kind of struggling at the start of the season for the first half of the season. For a lot of the season, there were some question marks. And then you get into the postseason, and he throws monster games for the Dodgers down the stretch to help them to the World Series title. So if you see Roki Sasaki come out and you say, okay, well, whoever signs him, he's started off slow. You got so excited for this guy to come over, and he hasn't really translated to the major leagues. You're going to have to give these guys time because, man, is he young. He's under 25, which means that's going to be very important. He's going to have to sign to a minor league deal. Now, we've talked about this a little bit, but if you haven't seen our previous episode, kind of just discussing when he got posted and whether or not the Phillies should be interested in him, because he doesn't have enough service time and he's not of the age where he can sign. Like this had to happen to Shohei Ohtani too when he first came over to the Angels. You have to sign a minor league deal. It doesn't mean they have to be in the minor leagues, but what it does mean is they're cheap. There's not going to be any $300 million deal for Roki Sasaki because he frankly doesn't fit the requirements for service time in a foreign professional league or age. So he's cheap. And let me tell you how talented. I mean, listen how talented he is, I should say. Listen to some of these numbers. Over 4 seasons over in Japan playing professionally, he's got a 2.02 ERA, 11.4 Ks per nine. So he's striking guys out like crazy. 2.0 walks per nine. So he doesn't really walk that many guys. And you'd like to see him even get that number down more if you want to see him progress. Accuracy is one of the things that you see progressed most from young pitchers. 6.0 hits per 9 over 4 seasons. That's another thing you'd like to see him get down, because at the major league level, 6 hits becomes, well, did that one go out of the yard because you have more pop and better professional hitters? But the big numbers you look at is the 2.02 ERA. He doesn't let runs score very often, and he's striking out a lot of guys. 11.4 Ks per 9. That's more than a strikeout an inning for Sasaki. He's a big dude, 6'3", and 23 years old. So he's going to project to build more velocity, build more movement, build more accuracy, all of this stuff. He's basically like, if he had been born in America, an American player from somewhere, let's just say, I don't know, he's from Oklahoma, like JT Remuto's from. 23 years old, he probably still would just be like coming up through the minor leagues right now. So this is basically like bringing in a top prospect from someone else's system, just saying, oh, you're number one pitching prospect, we're going to sign him. This would be like if Andrew Painter was a free agent. How many teams would be lined up for Andrew Painter? All of them. All of them. I don't care if you need pitching now or not. Like, this is a guy that's going to be around for a long time, and getting him in your organization early is going to be the key to keeping him there for a long time. Like, if you're not a terrible organization like the Los Angeles Angels, sorry to our friends over at Locked On Angels, but like getting Shohei Ohtani in and then re-signing him, and he wants to be here, and he won when he was here when he was younger because he's a monster player. Like, you just transformed your franchise. Now, if you don't do it right, obviously that guy can walk and go to the Dodgers. And speaking of the Dodgers, that's the likely destination for Sasaki, which is annoying because they already went out and got Blake Snell, and they already have a monster rotation. They're in the Juan Soto sweepstakes. We're going to talk about the Juan Soto sweepstakes coming up. But I want to read you some quotes from an MLB.com article from some international scouting directors that focused on Japan and Roki Sasaki as part of their work this past year. One international scouting director said, he's as good as advertised. He has an ideal, projectable, lean, and athletic frame. He has excellent arm action and delivery, 3+ power pitches with control over command. He has number one upside. To say that about a 23-year-old, that's important. And shout out to Jonathan Mayo, who did this article on MLB.com that I'm reading from right now and gathered these quotes and this information about Sasaki to make it very easy to go ahead and break all of this down for you. Another guy said he reminds me of Noah Syndergaard when he was fresh. Now, if you remember Noah Syndergaard from his time with the Philadelphia Phillies, you remember the not fresh. I'm not going to call him rotten, which would be, I guess, the opposite of fresh or spoiled. No, but we'll be nice. The not fresh version of Noah Syndergaard, who came to Philadelphia during 2022, it was part of that magical run to the World Series. That dude kind of stunk at that point, just compared to what he used to be. Right, he was no Taijuan Walker, but he wasn't the guy that he was when Noah Syndergaard was fresh. He was electric, and he was a big part of the reason the Mets made a World Series appearance kind of out of nowhere and then kind of never got back. But he was importantly part of that rotation. And when you look at Sasaki in those comparisons, he's going to throw hard. He's going to have great movement. And he's a big guy. You just see him as very, very projectable to the major league level. Fastball's great, splitter's great, and splitter is like a hot pitch right now in Major League Baseball. And the slider is going to be, I mean, you could project that out. Guys with good fastballs normally and create spin rate can create a good slider, even though it's his third best pitch right now. It's just, he's got a lot of upside, and he's very exciting, which is why the Philadelphia Phillies should absolutely be interested, because he's not going to cost you anything. And we've talked about the need that you could potentially have in the rotation. You add him in, and you don't even have to worry about re-signing Ranger Suarez. In fact, if you were to add Roki Sasaki, that's when the conversation about trading Ranger Suarez becomes real, because you don't really, like, you'd slot Christopher Sanchez into the 3. Sasaki would be the 4 this year, and I know 23, it's tough to rely on that guy big time. But he's that good, or at least he looks that good coming out of Japan. And then Andrew Painter would be your 5. And you could move Ranger Suarez now to add to something else with your team and take the chance to have a slightly diminished rotation, but high upside long term. And then you'd have 3 younger guys in Sanchez and Sasaki and Painter that you could have locked down for the long term and be your future answers to when Zach Wheeler's gone and when Aaron Nola are gone. So it makes plenty of sense for the Phillies. The problem with Roki Sasaki is it makes plenty of sense for basically every team in baseball. There are very few teams that should be like, we don't want him. We're not interested. But the other thing, too, is we had this conversation last year with Yamamoto. Japanese players, they like to play for organizations that have had Japanese star players in the past. Because think about it, right? If you were, just imagine everything was flip-flopped and you're born in America and you grow up here, and then you're watching the Japanese MLB. They have it over there. You would want to play for the teams that are constantly competing, the teams that are constantly winning. But more importantly, your favorite player would probably be someone that is from your part of the world or your country, and you would watch the team that they play on because you like that player, and you would start to like that team, and then you'd want to play for that team. It's that simple. They don't have they didn't grow up in South Philly, so they're not Phillies fans. They grew up watching, I don't know, Ichiro, so they like the Mariners, stuff like that. So that's part of the reason why the Phillies are at a disadvantage, because they've never really been major players in the space of Japanese posting professional baseball players. Now, they could, of course, buck that trend. Everybody gets their first one somewhere, and there have been a couple Japanese players in the past that have played in Philadelphia, but none really that you've signed through the postings. That's why most likely the Dodgers are a team you're going to look at, the Padres are a team you're going to look at, maybe the Red Sox are a team you're going to look at, maybe the Cubs. These are all guys that have all organizations that have signed big-time Japanese players in the past, maybe the Mariners. But you look at those West Coast teams, and those are the ones that are more likely to get attention from players being posted out of Japan. And they're free agents, so you could just pick. It's not like you have to choose, like any team gets priority over the other. You just get to pick whatever team you want to play for, and this guy's getting paid. It's not so much like Yamamoto where there also has to be a matchup with salary. So that's why it's not likely that the Philadelphia Phillies end up with him. I do expect, though, the Phillies to pursue him. But I could be wrong, because I expected the Philadelphia Phillies to pursue the biggest free agent out on the market this year. And apparently the reports that we talked about them not pursuing this guy were correct, because they're now coming out mainstream. And I'm just going to be annoyed again coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about Game Time first, because Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. No, they take care of all of that for you. Game Time Picks is perfect for curation that makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Basically what it does is it takes all those billion-dollar repost tickets out of there and says, hey, here's what seems to be your speed. Here's what seems to be in your type of section that you like. We're going to pick stuff that we think fits what you are interested in the most. So Game Time makes your process more streamlined. They also have all-in pricing, which means you toggle this feature. It'll show you the total upfront. No surprise fees at checkout. They got the panoramic views from your seat before you purchase the ticket, so you know what your view is going to be like at the event you're going to. They've got their Game Time guarantee, which means you find seats in the same row and section for less. They'll credit you 110% of the difference. You'll make money. You could make a job out of just going on Game Time and finding seats from other sites that are less. Well, I guess you can't really make a job because they don't exist. That's how confident Game Time is. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? You know it, folks. It's game time. All right, so the news that we've already talked about here somewhat on Locked On Phillies has now gone mainstream. And this is something that bears repeating, because part of the conversation when we talked about the Juan Soto sweepstakes was, okay, well, Bob Nightingale is reporting this, and we haven't really seen it anywhere else. And we know that, all due respect to Bob Nightingale, he's gotten big stuff wrong in the past. So it is nice to see further confirmation before running completely with the story. But what I said last time, what the original report was, Bob Nightingale reported, I believe it was last week, that the Philadelphia Phillies have not been in contact with any of Juan Soto's representation, have not had a meeting, none of that stuff. And the Phillies were initially one of the teams that were reported to have scheduled a meeting with Soto. That was the initial report. Then quickly it came out, no, they haven't scheduled one. Then the Bob Nightingale report came out saying they haven't even contacted anyone. And now that seems to have hit mainstream as Soto seems to narrow down his selection to a handful of teams: the Toronto Blue Jays, the New York Mets, the New York Yankees, the Boston Red Sox, the Los Angeles Dodgers. Those are the 5 teams that are the main 5 contenders for Juan Soto. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the Phillies not on that list. And now everyone's saying, well, the Phillies never even had a meeting with Juan Soto, which to me is crazy. Like, what does a meeting cost you? You don't have time for Juan Soto? Like, I don't care. And now, granted, it could be this. It could be Juan Soto being told by his representation. Like, Scott Boras is very tight with the Philadelphia Phillies, and he's very knowledgeable about all baseball organizations. That's how he gets his guys paid. It could have been as simple as Scott Boras said, hey, listen, Juan, they're not going to be in the range. If you have a meeting, they're going to talk to you, but they're not going to make you nearly as much money as these other teams because of their payroll already. It would probably be a waste of your time, probably be a waste of theirs, so not worth it to go through with that. Like, I'm not saying this is completely the Phillies doing where they just said, no thanks, Juan Soto. It could have been a conversation between Dave Dombrowski and Scott Boras that ended up with, yeah, listen, if you're looking for that number, there's nothing we could do. It's not even worth the time for the meeting. We'd like him, but that's not realistic for us. So I'm not going to crush the Phillies on this, but I don't like that they didn't take the meeting. And it does seem to be, like, the reporting seems to be that the Phillies were not interested in meeting with Juan Soto. And that framing is dangerous because that makes me believe that they kind of did say, well, we're not going to take a shot at this. And I think they should have taken a shot. And frankly, I think they should have gone all out to try and do what they could do to sign him, whether he wanted to be or not. $700 million is $700 million. And John Middleton, that would be a huge, huge ask. Nobody can expect John Middleton to go out and pay $700 million for Juan Soto this offseason after what he's done to acquire Trey Turner and Bryce Harper, Nick Castellanos, Kyle Schwarber, JT Realmuto, all of these guys that you've signed a long-term deal, Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Christopher Sanchez, a long-term deal now, bringing in all of these high-level free agents or re-signing high-level talent in your organization. This is not rip John Middleton time because, frankly, he's gone above and beyond to do what he can do to make this team as talented as possible. It would just be unrealistic to see them add more, or it would be unrealistic to demand that they add more. They could add more, and John Middleton could do that. I'm not saying there's something that restricts him. I'm just saying it's just like, you've already done so much. He can't get crushed for this. So I'm not mad at him. I am just slightly annoyed about the framing of the reports that it seems that the Phillies were just like, yeah, no thanks, we're good, which could be misrepresentation. I already talked to you, like I brought it up already. If Juan Soto said, hey, we're kind of wasting each other's time here, or if Scott Boras said, hey, we're kind of wasting each other's time here, I don't blame the Phillies for not taking the meeting. But whatever the case may be, the Philadelphia Phillies are out on Juan Soto. It's not happening. It was a long shot to begin with, right? And this might seem like we're going into another free agency breakdown. I mean, we talked about Juan Soto already. You don't need me to break down Juan Soto. If you've watched a millisecond of baseball, you know how good Juan Soto is, and you know how transformative he's going to be for one of those franchises that are in on him this offseason, and let the bidding war begin. Now, one thing I want to talk about with Juan Soto is where the best and worst places for him to end up would be amongst those 5 teams. Remember, the 5 teams that are the main ones reportedly in the Juan Soto running still: the Toronto Blue Jays, the Boston Red Sox, the Los Angeles Dodgers, the New York Yankees, and the New York Mets. So the best place for him to end up, send him to Toronto, please, for the love of God. I would love to see Juan Soto in Toronto with the Blue Jays. Sure, go for it. Duke it out with the Yankees. Duke it out with those other teams in the American League, the Guardians, the upstart Royals, the Baltimore Orioles. Like, go ahead and deal with that. Put him in Canada. Let us forget about him. That would be the easiest way for the Philadelphia Phillies to avoid having to think about Juan Soto, unless, of course, the Dodgers find their way, or the Blue Jays find their way to the World Series. So the least troubling aspect would be the Toronto Blue Jays. The second least troubling would be the Boston Red Sox. Simply, those are the 2 American League teams, right? Well, those are the 2 American League teams that are lower status than the third one that we're going to talk about. But Red Sox, similar to the Blue Jays, we wouldn't really think about them that much in Boston. The only difference is I see that as a more prominent organization, a winning organization, a organization that has proven that they can build around superstar players in the past, but also one with guys like Mookie Betts that will prove that they can let them go at some point. So better than the Blue Jays, still not a threat to the Philadelphia Phillies. The Yankees are the third least or the third most. They're right in the middle there because they are a bona fide championship contender. We're in the World Series last year. They have Aaron Judge. They are monsters. If they get Juan Soto back, well, they're just as dangerous, but that's a team you have to face in the World Series. Here's where it gets interesting. The top two, neither are like enjoyable for the Philadelphia Phillies. This bottom three is just like, great, go there. Rooting for them. You should be pulling for them to sign Juan Soto because the second worst option would be the New York Mets in division with a team that just knocked you out. Long-term contract for a superstar player like Juan Soto. Having to deal with him in the National League East would be annoying as all get out. You don't want that guy in your division if you can help it, but it's not as worse. It's not as bad, I should say, as DEFCON 1, which would be Juan Soto to the Dodgers. If you're telling me that they're going to have a team where it's Soto, Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, like all of these guys in the rotation, I would lose. It's over. It's absolutely over. If Juan Soto goes to the Dodgers, there's no way the Phillies compete in the National League. There's no way anyone competes in the National League. It would not be good for the sport. That would do it. I'm being honest with you right now. I don't know how anyone beats that team besides sheer luck. There's no way to match up to that firepower. Or like if they are destroyed by injuries, and even then, they probably have more superstar talent than you. And that's including the Phillies, who have as much superstar talent as pretty much anyone else in baseball. Pray he doesn't go to the Dodgers. Pray a little bit less that he doesn't go to the Mets. Pray he does go to one of the American League teams. That's the Shohei Ohtani breakdown. Coming up next, we're going to look through a couple of teams that are potential suitors for Alec Bohm. We know that the Philadelphia Phillies are shopping the all-star third baseman, but who are the teams that are interested? It appears that there are three right now, and we'll talk about what those three can offer. As the same thing for all three of them, pitching, pitching, pitching. We'll discuss coming up as we wrap up Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about FanDuel first, though, because you got to be ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So take that $5 bet, put it on a heavy, heavy favorite. Doesn't matter. You're not looking to get payback on that bet. You'll get $150 if it wins. It's super easy. And then you can use that $150 on futures and parlays and live bets and all that great stuff that FanDuel offers. So that's FanDuel.com. You got to go ahead and check them out. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk about this Alec Bohm situation because we know that there are these swirling rumors about where he's going to be traded and how he's going to be traded and who he's going to be traded for, and I don't want him traded. That's me saying that. That's me personally. The Philadelphia Phillies, though, they seem to have had enough of his attitude and his failures in the postseason and his inexplicable second half struggles after starting first halves hot, and they're like, we're ready to cut bait because we need to maximize our championship window. And, buddy, if you're not going to help us win now, sorry, but we don't have time for that. Bryce Harper's only getting older. Trey Turner's only getting older. Zach Wheeler's only getting older. This team is only getting older, and it's going to be hard to rebuild them into what we have right now. So as we're in the twilight of this era of Philadelphia Phillies baseball, and I still think they have a couple of years, you're going to be looking at a increased focus on win-now players. And that may mean guys like Alec Bohm who say, okay, well, you got major upside, but there's this fatal flaw right now, and I don't know if you could fix it. And they may cut bait quicker than they should, trying to accelerate this championship contention payoff, which would be a World Series. So As crazy as I think it is trading an arbitration-eligible third baseman, all-star starter at 28 years old, and you've heard me say that multiple times if you're a frequent listener of the podcast, there are teams that are interested. Shocker. And the teams that are interested all have the same thing, which makes it very clear. You can read the tea leaves very easily on what the Philadelphia Phillies are looking to acquire if they're to trade Alec Bohm. So here are the three teams that have been most prominent in the rumors for trading for Alec Bohm. One are the Chicago White Sox. One are the Kansas City Royals. One are the Seattle Mariners. So Mariners, Royals, White Sox. What do those teams have in common? Well, the Mariners and the Royals are very similar in one aspect. They both had great, surprising years with their starting rotation. They had guys in their starting rotation that kind of popped out of nowhere. They ate a bunch of innings that were really, really talented. The reason that the Royals were as good as they were, Bobby Witt's a huge part of that. But also, they got some great pitching. The reason that the Mariners were probably better than they should have been, they got some really good pitching. So you look at that and you say, okay, there are a couple of names in there that you might not even be totally familiar with if you're a baseball fan, if you don't watch American League Baseball. There are some quality pitchers. And the big name that has been between those two teams thrown out a good amount I've seen in trade rumors, Logan Gilbert from the Seattle Mariners, who had himself an outstanding year last year. But those teams are both, like, they're pitching centric. They both have their superstars with Rodriguez out there in Seattle and Witt there in Kansas City. But the rotations were the strength of their teams last year. Clearly, that indicates that the Phillies want pitching. And you might say, Connor, well, why the White Sox? They weren't good at anything last year. And you might say as a team they weren't, and as a rotation they weren't, but they have Garrett Crochet, who is one of the top trade targets in the offseason this year, a premier level pitcher that the Philadelphia Phillies could add in an Alec Bohm trade. If they're going to, they probably have to throw in prospects as well. The Phillies probably would on that one. But that's the key, right? Is the Phillies are looking to add pitching for Alec Bohm. You could just tell by the teams that are brought into these trade rumors. They all have pitching depth, or in the White Sox case, they don't have pitching depth, but their team stinks so much that they got to try and rebuild somehow. And man, would that be dirty work sending Alec Bohm from the city of Philadelphia, where he's competing for a championship every year, to Chicago to play for the White Sox, and a team that was just historically bad this past year. That would probably be his least preferred destination, but unfortunately, he doesn't really get much of a say. That's part of the downside of being under team control. The most likely situations there, right? I don't know that the Phillies return, or they're willing to give up more to go get Garrett Crochet. I don't know. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. We talked about multiple times now how the starting rotation may be a little bit more of a weak spot than we thought, or just a future trouble spot that you want to keep an eye on. But that's their big asset. So they're going to want a huge return. For the Mariners and the Royals, they have other guys in their rotation. It's not just emptying the coffers to go get Alec Bohm. So it's more likely to me that the Philadelphia Phillies end up exercising one of those options, even though those pitchers may be lesser options, because you're going to have to do some retooling in future years. So do you want to empty everything now while also moving a high-level third baseman? Okay, that's one theory. Another theory is, if you're going to make the Alec Bohm trade, this is probably going to be your biggest trade chip that you move in this era of Phillies baseball. They're not trading any other arbitration-eligible all-star starters. That just doesn't happen very often. So do you throw in prospects on this trade and get a mega return? Maybe that's the way you look at it. Whatever the case may be, it seems right now to be a three-team race for Alec Bohm. And it seems right now that the return is going to be a high-level arm. And that is, I guess it should be exciting. It would lead to a necessity that the Philadelphia Phillies sign Alex Bregman, because outside of Bregman, there's not really any high-level third baseman options in free agency, and you don't want to take too big of a step back to the point where you've got like a guy, I love Edmundo Sosa, but a guy like Edmundo Sosa playing third base for 160 games this year, that's not a recipe for success. It's not. As much as I love Sosa, his depth is what makes him valuable, not him as a starter for anything more than, well, I would have said a couple weeks, but we saw this past year a month. So, hey, who knows? Maybe Edmundo Sosa's magic, but you want to be able to back that position up with a guy that is still quality of Alec Bohm or better. The whole idea of trading him is to improve on that position in some shape, way or form. I guess it's way, shape, or form would be the expression. But still murky waters surrounding the Alec Bohm trade. I don't get the sense from anything that I'm reading or anything I'm hearing that stuff is close, but stuff's weird like that. It could snap in an instant on like a certain prospect that you weren't willing to give up, that now you are. Who knows? Something to keep an eye on. The Alec Bohm trade watch is going to be an offseason long type of thing, though, until this deal gets done. And we'll see if it is indeed one of those three teams. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate that very much. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube, all that stuff. That really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. I appreciate everyone who's done that already and who's going to do that going forward. We'll have another free agent breakdown tomorrow. Who do we want to do? You know what? Let's go with an intriguing guy and kind of an under-the-radar potential superstar. We'll talk about Anthony Santander, formerly of the Baltimore Orioles, on tomorrow's episode in our free agent spotlight. But that's all for today's episode, so I'll talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.